They were slaves. No luxury for them. No pleasures, no treasures for them. Instead, misery, day in and day out. They suffered under the Egyptians. Cruel taskmasters had whips, and they beat them with those whips if they didn't work hard enough. And all day they worked in the fields or building things for the Egyptians. Hard, back-breaking labor in the hot Egyptian sun. Moses chooses to be associated with these miserable people, these wretched, suffering, ill-treated people. He chooses to share in their taunts, in the mockery and abuse heaped upon the Israelites. And that's the idea of with here, to be in association with. From every human point of view then, such a man who would choose such a thing would be considered insane. Insane. To give up the life of an Egyptian prince to become a Hebrew slave, utter insanity, the world would say. And there's no indication at this point in the history that this situation is going to change anytime soon. Pharaoh is at the height of his power and his cruelty. The Egyptians have their jackboot well and truly upon the neck of the Israelites, and they are enjoying it. And salvation and deliverance seem far, far away. God, after all, has not yet appeared to Moses and told him that he will be the deliverer of God's people. The burning bush incident has not yet happened. In fact, it will be 40 more years before that happens. From all earthly perspectives then, Moses could not have chosen a worse time to make this choice. And there are, from an earthly perspective, bad times to join the church. And there are good times to join the church. And this was a bad time to join the church. Think, for example, of the early church. It was a bad time to join the church in the early period when the Romans were persecuting the Christians and throwing them to the lions and crucifying them and so on. It was a bad time to become a member of the church. But all that changed when Emperor Constantine came to power. Then he made Christianity the official religion of the empire. It was now fashionable and advantageous to become a member of the church. And that, of course, meant the church was corrupted by all kinds of worldly people. Or think of the time of the Reformation, when to be a member of the church meant to be arrested, thrown into a dungeon, tortured and put to death, probably burned at the stake. A bad time, from an earthly point of view, to join the church. And one wonders today, if persecution were to start in the Western world and it was a difficult thing to do to be a member of a true church of Jesus Christ, one wonders how many professing Christians would still remain members of the church. It would then be a bad time from every perspective to be a member of the church. Today, inconvenience is enough to keep professing Christians away from the church. Inconvenience is enough to keep them away from the worship services. I don't have time. I have more important things to do. Moses did not say that. Moses did not say, it's a bad time for me to join with the people of God. Perhaps I'll wait until their lot becomes a bit better, and then I'll jump on the bandwagon, as it were, just before the Exodus occurs. Moses understood full well what the consequences would be if he were to join the people of God. He made a deliberate choice. He chose to suffer affliction with the people of God. And so one day, we are told in Exodus 2, he goes out to see his brethren. They are his brethren. He goes out to look upon their burdens. He understands their burdens. And he kills an Egyptian he sees mistreating a Hebrew. And then he's forced to run away because of Pharaoh's wrath against him. But come what may, he will be associated with this wretched people, the Israelites. Now, thus far I have described the Israelites as a miserable people, as miserable, wretched slaves. But notice that that is not how the text describes them. It says, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God. That's how Moses understood them. They are the people of God. They are the people who are God's peculiar possession. The Israelites are the people of God, the object of God's love and care, the people with whom he enters into a covenant of friendship. This is Israel's election. In eternity, God determined that these people would be his people. He set his love upon them. He chose Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and their seed after them. He takes delight in being called their God. He is not ashamed, we learned earlier in the chapter, to be called their God, to be known as Jehovah, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And God is determined to bless this people, who are now in history wretched people, with all of the blessings of salvation, to have them be his people, to dwell with him in covenant fellowship in the land of Israel, and ultimately in the heavenly Jerusalem itself. And this then is the people to whom is promised salvation itself. God has promised to Israel and no other people blessing and salvation. That's what God said to Abraham. Surely blessing I will bless thee, and multiplying I will multiply thee. And that promise stands. It stands forever. All those who are the children of Abraham, that is to say, the elect, the believers, are blessed and given salvation. Which means that Israel are under the blessing of God, eternally elected by God, the friends of God in the covenant of grace, and the Egyptians are the objects of God's hatred and his wrath. And Moses understands this, and therefore he will not be associated with the accursed and hateful and hated Egyptians, although he has grown up among them and has experienced many of the benefits of their educational system, but rather he will be associated with the people of God. And that's our calling too, as Christians, to associate ourselves with the people of God. And today also, many professing Christians will not associate themselves with the people of God. They say, in effect, the opposite of what Moses resolved to do. I will not suffer affliction with the people of God. I will call myself a Christian. I will worship God in the privacy of my own home and in the comfort of my own home. I will not make any effort to join a church where I can hear the preaching of the gospel and fellowship with other believers. I will read at home. I will listen to sermons on the internet, but I will not suffer affliction with the people of God. That I repeat, was not the attitude of Moses. The Israelites are the people of God not because they deserve to be the people of God, but rather because they belong to Jesus Christ, and they have Christ in their loins. In themselves they are miserable, wretched sinners, unworthy of the love and fellowship of God, because God is a holy and a righteous God. And Israel, being sinners, deserve to be punished and ultimately destroyed by this righteous God, just as much as the Egyptians deserved and deserve to be punished and destroyed by this righteous God. And God promises salvation to the Israelites not because of their merits or any of their works, but simply because of His grace in Jesus Christ. One day, Jesus Christ will come. He is the seed of the woman. He will deliver Israel from all of their sins in the way of His being bruised in His heel by the devil on the cross. Israel will be saved, and Pharaoh and his people will be destroyed. And Moses understood then that Israel are the blessed ones. They are the blessed and the beloved people of God, all appearances to the contrary notwithstanding. Israel did not look like the blessed people of God. Israel looked like those who were under God's curse. After all, they are the ones who are the slaves. They are the ones who are suffering. But appearances are deceptive. Egypt was flourishing, it is true. But that's not the point. The point is not whether you have luxury and riches, or you have poverty or slavery. The point is, what is God's disposition toward you? What is God's attitude toward you? Why did God give so many good gifts to the Egyptians? Why did He cause them to prosper and become the greatest nation of that day? Why did He use them to afflict His people? Not because He loved them, not at all, but because He hated them. And it was God's purpose then to use the Egyptians so that He could show His power in them, in their Pharaoh, and in them as individual Egyptians. Eventually, God is going to destroy the nation of Egypt. And through this, He is going to bless His people, Israel. But Israel might look like an afflicted people, and they are, and therefore they might look like they are under the curse of God, and God has no love for them at this time, but that's not true either. God's purpose in their affliction is to prepare them for the salvation which He will give them through Moses and the 10 plagues. And God therefore wants to wean them away from the love which is in their hearts to the world, and cause them to be prepared for and to long the salvation which He has promised them in Jesus Christ. That was Moses' consideration of Israel. They are the people of God, and therefore He will suffer affliction with the people of God. He also considers the pleasures and treasures of Egypt. From a spiritual point of view, he sees two things. First of all, he sees that they are the pleasures of sin. Notice that in the text, the pleasures of sin for a season. One of the characteristics of the wicked is that they love pleasure more than they love God. That's 2 Timothy 3:4. Lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God. And to enjoy the world's pleasures, you must sin. And for Moses to enjoy Egypt's pleasures, he must sin. He must involve himself in idolatry and indulge